Today we're going to talk about my opinions on the DC Extended Universe, specifically within the context of me being a writer for DC Universe fan fiction called the Cuckoo Universe. Now, I write a lot of DC fan fiction, or at least what started off as your typical DC fan fiction. Now it's just everything I write happens in the shared universe, and that just happens to include my DC fan fiction. And I want my universe to feel like a living, breathing universe, so DC characters pop up frequently. Now, the DC Extended Universe, or Expanded Universe, I can't remember what the E stands for, but it's effectively the DC Cinematic Universe, DC's answer to the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Suicide Squad, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that was. Wonder Woman and Justice League. Now, I had an optimistic view of the DC Extended Universe when it began. Particularly, I liked Man of Steel. When it first came out, and when I first saw it, I liked Man of Steel. I thought it was an interesting take on Superman. But when I went to rewatch Man of Steel, I realized, Jesus Christ, this goes on forever. And also, when you rewatch it after, like, the first time it was like, wow. Second time it was like, oh god. Like, this is so long, and you start to realize that there aren't real themes that should be associated with the Superman character in Man of Steel. After Man of Steel, and I was slowly beginning to realize that Man of Steel, I didn't really like Man of Steel. I just liked certain parts of it, and even that was just the idea of behind some of the certain parts of it, and not the execution. Particularly, I'm thinking of like the role Krypton plays in the movie. Like, you know, the whole feels like the first third of the movie is set on Krypton. I like the idea of fleshing out Krypton. I like the idea of, you know, incorporating Zod into the stuff. You see that in the Cuckoo Universe, although my Cuckoo Universe stuff came out before Man of Steel. So maybe I liked the beginning of Man of Steel because it sort of mirrored the Cuckoo Universe. Except, I think the Cuckoo Universe does Krypton better. You'll see when Sins of the Father is released, Chapter 1 deals with the destruction of Krypton, and I think that's the best. To sound arrogant, I think my interpretation of the destruction of Krypton is the best interpretation than what any comic writer in Superman's 75-year history has done. But yeah, Man of Steel, like, I liked it at first, didn't like it after, like, the second viewing. Batman v Superman, when it's announced, I'm optimistic, because I liked Man of Steel the first time I saw it. So I'm like, alright, well, let's tell me some Batman vs. Superman. And then the more that came out of Batman vs. Superman, the more I'm like, oh no. I was excited for the first trailer, but then I saw that more and more influence was coming in from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. And I know people say Dark Knight Returns is like the second coming of Jesus Christ. I don't really like Dark Knight Returns. And I especially don't like Dark Knight Returns when it's used... I don't like Frank Miller's interpretation of Batman when it's used... that's solely the... How do I word this? You can't make a Batman universe with only using Frank Miller's interpretation of Batman. Frank Miller's interpretation of Batman only works if you know the context of Batman outside of Frank Miller's interpretation. That might be a topic for another day. But I don't like how people sort of like fanboy about Frank Miller's Batman, particularly The Dark Knight Returns, because that leads to non-Batman fans to think, oh, I should read The Dark Knight Returns first. No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't read Dark Knight Returns until you've read a lot of Batman and get an understanding for the character. So you can understand the significance of The Dark Knight Returns, and understand why it only works as that one-shot graphic novel, and shouldn't be the basis for the entirety of the Batman character. And then more and more came out. Lex Luthor seemed more like a Riddler dude to me. And then I saw Doomsday in the trailer, like, oh no. And then Wonder Woman comes in. And I watched the movie. I like watching Batman vs. Superman better than watching Man of Steel, just because I don't think Batman vs. Superman drags on as long as Man of Steel. So, in that sense, it's more enjoyable to me, I guess, but I still don't think it's a good interpretation of the DC universe. the DC universe definitely puts its heroes on a pedestal. They're definitely sort of gods among men, as opposed to Marvel's world outside your window take. If you read the Cuckoo universe, at least at this point in time, the Justice League is like spoken about by everyone, but you hardly ever see it because the Justice League is disbanded. But people know when you're talking about the Justice League, you're talking about those superheroes in the Cuckoo universe. So the Cuckoo universe Justice League is almost... I'm trying to write it sort of like God. It's an unseen force that may or may not actually exist, since in the Cuckoo universe at that time, the Justice League doesn't exist anymore. Yet people are still talking about it as if they're like the top dog. Meanwhile, you have the Avengers, who are actually around doing stuff on the ground level, but people treat them as rookies, people treat them as jokes in the Cuckoo universe. That's because the Avengers haven't really proved themselves yet, despite stopping Loki's invasion in the Avengers miniseries, and despite going toe-to-toe with Megatron in Transformers Retreat. So, I really wanted to illustrate that difference between Justice League and the Avengers in the Cuckoo universe. The DC Extended Universe tries to be hyper-realistic with their DC characters, and that's not what they're meant to be. Now, I'm not saying they're supposed to be like bombastic, Adam West type stuff, but I'm saying, like, it's just too dark and realistic, and that's a weird thing coming from me when my favorite stuff to write is dark and realistic, or really weirdly out there and esoteric, but, what a range, but, it just seems like, again, it seems like the interpretation, particularly Zack Snyder has for these characters, is from, like, spectacular one-shots, like The Dark Knight Returns, and he understands it from that, but doesn't understand the actual characters outside of that context. Suicide Squad, I actually like Suicide Squad, okay? I thought it was mindless fun. I don't think it was smart, and I don't think it was trying to say anything. I thought the CG was bad, but I thought it was fun to watch. I don't have... Besides what I just said, I don't really have anything bad to say about Suicide Squad. I don't like its interpretations of, like, some characters. And that's the overall theme. The overall bad thing I think the DC Extended Universe does is it isn't a faithful interpretation of the characters. And it's like, oh, but it's the big screen, it's the movies, you have to make changes. Make changes like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, Thor in the comics, at least at the time, was nothing like Thor when he showed up in the Thor movie. They made tweaks, they made changes, but at the heart, and even at the aesthetic design, pretty much every MCU character is recognizable and similar to their comic character. The reason these comic movies exist is because the comics are popular enough that people know those characters enough that they watch the movies for it. It's not like they like these characters so much so they'll watch a completely different interpretation of the character with a completely different aesthetic design. Aquaman. I hate Aquaman. Everyone's like, yeah, this cool Jason Momoa Aquaman's cool. As someone who's a really big Aquaman fan, I really don't like Jason Momoa's Aquaman. And I hate it when people make fun of Aquaman. This is just the breakdown of an Aquaman fan right now. But Jeff Johns' Aquaman run should be the gold standard for Aquaman. And recently, Aquaman information for the upcoming Aquaman movie came out, and it says it's sort of based on Aquaman the Trench, which is the beginning of Jeff Johns' Aquaman run. But the Jason Momoa Aquaman is not the Aquaman I know and love. He doesn't look human. Obviously he's a human, but he doesn't... Like, Aquaman is like, has a clean, sharp, his hair's all good. He has blue eyes, and the blue eyes are important. Aquaman can't be anything but a freaking Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed person. And, I talked about in my Matt Tracker video that the physical appearance of a character, their race, shouldn't matter unless it's important to the character. It's important in the context of the Aquaman character, so I don't really like this interpretation of Aquaman and Jason Momoa. The Aquaman story, the thing with Aquaman is he's half Atlantean, but he looks human, so when he comes to Atlantis, the people don't accept him because, one, he grew up on the surface world, and two, he looks more human than Atlantean. And again, just like I mentioned back in the Spider-Man episode of Radix Reflects, how Superman's bridge between two worlds really appeals to me because of my mixed-race heritage and because of my experiences in life. That's the very reason I am such an Aquaman fan, is because of that focus, because of that take on Aquaman. How he's a bridge between two worlds who's not accepted properly, fully 100% by either of them. Those stories are ones I can really relate to. Those stories, I live for those sort of stories. Aquaman and Superman provide those stories, and I don't see them in the DC Extended Universe. You can't do it justice in Aquaman just because of the character design and characterization. The personality of Aquaman is completely different too, but the character design and characterization of Aquaman in the DCEU doesn't work for that story. Now, you kind of see Superman's bridge between two worlds story in the extended universe, but I don't think it's done well. Okay, so Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was good, the only one that really counts. It's good, solid Wonder Woman movie. Next, Justice League. I hate Justice League, and that's not because Justice League's a bad movie. It's because Justice League is a meh movie, and with any other movie, I can be fine. Like, Suicide Squad was a meh movie, and I find it enjoyable. Justice League's a meh movie, but I hate it because it's a Justice League movie. The first time the Justice League is on the big screen, the Justice League, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, what should be Green Lantern, Aquaman, the greatest superheroes that people knew about long before Iron Man showed up on the scene with his movie. The DC heroes, I like the DC heroes much more than... I like the DC characters much more than I like the Marvel characters. Which is weird. And I know people say you can relate better to the Marvel characters, but I relate more to the DC characters. Simply because you have Batman, who's an introvert, analytical brooder, which is basically me. You have Superman and Aquaman, who have the bridge of bridging both worlds. You even get that with Wonder Woman to some extent. You have Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, who is serious sometimes, but he can't be serious too long before he has to crack a joke every now and then. I relate so much more to the DC characters than I do the Marvel characters. I don't really relate to Captain America. I don't really relate to Iron Man. I don't relate to the Hulk. I don't relate to Spider-Man. But the DC characters I definitely do. But Justice League. Why would the greatest heroes created in the American mythos is just a meh movie? It just disgusts me. A Justice League movie should have been on the level of Avengers, if not better. Avengers is a great movie. It's kind of brain dead. There isn't much to explore with Avengers rather than just let's bring all these superheroes together and then they fight stuff. But it's still a fun movie. Justice League, man. Flash isn't the Flash from the comics. Again, all the Marvel characters from the MCU are just like their comic counterparts, with enough tweaks to make them work on the movie screen, relate to a wider audience, but still keep their core character. That can't be said the same for the DC extended movie universe characters. Superman isn't Superman, Batman isn't Batman, Flash isn't Flash, Aquaman isn't Aquaman. Wonder Woman is Wonder Woman. It's just sometimes I can't stand Wonder Woman's accent in the movies. Sometimes I think her acting is a bit her acting is either really good or subpar. There's rarely an in-between moment with Gal Gadot or Gal Gadot, or however you pronounce it. I actually liked Cyborg in Justice League. But I don't think he felt like Cyborg either, when it comes down to it. Man, Justice League makes me so disappointed and sad. I joke all the time about how I think the Cuckoo universe is terrible, especially my kindergarten and middle school stuff. I unironically think a lot of the Cuckoo universe stuff is better than the DC extended universe, which is saying something. I think I get the characters better. I think my interpretation of the characters from my elementary and middle school stories are better than the DC extended universe stories, how they interpret the characters. And my Batman killed a dude in his first appearance. That's as off base of Batman as you can get. Although I guess Batman in the DC Extended Universe is a serial murder too, isn't he? So there's that.